welcome and a welcome and a toda toda rabba to Dr. Sara Offenberg, who I will introduce in a moment. We are so happy that you are joining us from Beersheba today. So for you, it's good afternoon. So I am Tovim. When I was thinking about how to frame this morning in terms of your topic and Tu B'Shvat and MLK Day, and now in light of what just happened in Colleyville, I was thinking about the following. First of all, I want to dedicate our learning this morning to be, in essence, our offering of gratitude, our gratitude to God, our gratitude to the local and federal law enforcement that helped bring the situation to a peaceful conclusion, as our offering of strength to Rabbi Citron Walker and the other hostages and to the entire congregation Beth Israel community. And I say that this morning of learning is an offering because part of our action as a community is communal learning and a strong continuation of, you know, in our tagline, learn, right? That's one of the pillars of Or Zarua, and part of the way that we show not only ourselves, but the world, our Jewish continuity is a commitment to continued and serious learning. So this confluence of Tu B'Shvat and MLK Day and the topic of your lecture, Dr. Offenbach, Let the Earth Sprout Vegetation, illuminating the account of creation in Hebrew manuscripts from Ashkenaz. So I was thinking about the following. The link between creation and Tu B'Shvat, of course, is obvious. Thinking about illuminated manuscripts, though, I think brings it to a deeper level because part of Tu B'Shvat was very much in the details. We don't think about it today in New York City, but were we living elsewhere, we would be looking very carefully at our fruit. Has it fully ripened? Has it not ripened? Are we counting it in last year, this year? Is it done with the Orla, the 3 years of the fruit? There's all these intricacies and details, which of course is very much what looking at illuminated manuscripts in the serious way that you have done, I imagine, is about. And the fact that in your lecture, one of the notes you had was, I examined creation scenes in light of Jewish-Christian medieval relations in Ashkenaz. Because creation, of course, is universal. It's a universal theme, and hence the link to MLK Day. Because first and foremost, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a reverend. He was a devout Southern Baptist, and his activism came from the strength of his faith. And so I think it's most fitting that today we are doing through our limud a confluence of all of those themes, of the universality of creation, of really paying attention to the details, and of thinking about what this story and what this study means in the broader context of Jewish-Christian relations and, by extension, interfaith relations, which we see how much that has been important in the community in Colleyville and for all of us at this time. So Dr. Sara Offenbach, I'm just going to share a line or two of her bio because you have the whole thing. Associate Professor at the Department of Arts at Ben Gurion University of the Negev. I love this, an interdisciplinary PhD in the Department of Jewish Thought and the Department of the Arts. Has published numerous articles and 2 books, including Illuminated Piety, Pietistic Texts and Images in the North French Hebrew Miscellany, and Up in Arms, Images of Knights and the Divine Chariot in Esoteric Ashkenazi Manuscripts of the Middle Ages. If you haven't seen it, you have to see the Hall of Knights in Armor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, just based on the title of that book. So without further ado, we welcome you and we look forward to learning with you. If you have questions during the lecture, Dr. Offenbach welcomes them. We're going to ask you to please put them in the chat, and Helene and I will manage them in the chat just so that it runs smoothly, and there'll also be time for questions at the end.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here via Zoom. I'll just share my presentation. Hopefully you can see it. Okay, so the creation. Images of the creation is one of the most obvious topic in medieval manuscripts, both in Jewish and in Christian manuscripts. Especially in Christian, as Jewish artists used to copy from Christian manuscripts and use their style, and then entered some of their own perspective on the illuminations. But I'll start first because it's Tu B'Shvat, and as Rabbi Bolton also said, it's something that is obvious. And I'll start with Midrash Tadshe, which is the main Midrash that will follow this lecture throughout it until the end. It's a Midrash that now we know that was written in the 11th century by Rabbi Moses the Preacher. And here it begins with the idea of the third day of creation. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation. And the idea that there was a thought behind the creation. That is something that we should remember throughout the things I'm going to say here, that there is not only a thought about the way the universe was created, but also some more of a Jewish spotlight on the creation. So that is something that would guide us here. But in this lecture, I examine creation scenes in light of Jewish-Christian medieval relations in Ashkenaz. And when I'm saying Ashkenaz, I mean German lands and France, against the background of contemporary textual and artistic evidence. Ashkenazi manuscripts exhibit an interesting phenomenon. While the visualization of creation is in them is missing, we don't see the actual creation. The notion of Maaseh Bereshit, the account of creation, which I'll explain later, and Maaseh HaMishkan, HaMikdash, the account of the tabernacle, the temple, are substituted in place. So we're going to see not the scenes of the actual creation in Jewish art, but some other concept. First, I love the sound of music, so let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start, and let's start with Christian art from the 13th century, and now we're looking at a French manuscript produced for the French king, who wasn't in favor of Jews, I must say. It's quite anti-Semitic manuscript. Almost every page has something anti-Jewish in it, but now we're looking at the creation. It's a beautiful manuscript for one who's studying anti-Semitism. For me, it's wonderful, but not for everybody, I guess. But we see here something that came to be the norm in Christian manuscripts afterwards, from the 13th century onward, and that is the portrayal of Jesus as the creator. And we see him here creating the universe. And afterwards, we see him in medallions, standing outside the wall and creating entire world day by day. Now, this manuscript, as well as this one, as I said, were produced for the French king, and they gave the tone to other manuscripts afterwards. Both Christians and Jewish artists copied from them. So for us, they are very important. And on every manuscript, we always see the image of Jesus as one of the personas of God who is creating the universe, thus putting him in the spotlight of creation. And another one here from England, just to show you how the theme works. You can see here, he is in the middle and the days of creation around him. And afterwards, the story of Adam and Eve. And also from, this is close to your home, from New York, but it was done in Italy. And again, we see medallions and Jesus as the creator. But when you come to Hebrew illuminated manuscripts, we see a different story. And I'll start with the ones from Spain, and afterwards go back to Ashkenaz, as Ashkenaz will be the main focus here. Now, in sporadic Haggadot for Passover, we see the creation starting only from the image of Adam and Eve, or actually from the creation of Adam. We don't see the other days of creation, only from the sixth day onward. For example, here we see what is called the Golden Haggadah. It was made in the 14th century, Catalonia. We see Adam giving the names to the animals, and afterwards we see the creation of Eve. And as I said, that's the beginning of everything. They don't show the actual creation. On the second Haggadah, this one, it is so-called sister Haggadah because it was copied from the Golden Haggadah. It was also produced in Catalonia in the 14th century. But here we see, I hope you can see it, it's very damaged. We see the image of Adam in the middle, and angels, multiple angels, are creating him. Now the idea here is to come across against the idea that the creation of Adam portrays the Trinity. Because of the plural sentence in Genesis 1:26, let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness, which is interpreted as supporting the dogma of Trinity in Christianity. The illumination in this Haggadah stresses that the plural refers to the angels, that the Lord said, let us create Adam. So it is more of respect for the angels and not an actual contribution of them in this. And it is based on Rashi. So here we see a direct conflict with the Christian understanding of creation and the way Jews portrayed it in their manuscripts. The Sarajevo Haggadah, which is, I think it's one of the most known Haggadah, also produced in Catalonia in the 14th century. This is an exception. Here we do see the creation, even the void before the actual creation. And you can see it that it is just a rectangular and we don't see any pattern of the world. But from the first day onwards, we do see a pattern with the borders of an arch. And I'll return to this point later on, which also resembles the heavenly temple. The idea that was a rectangular and an arch above it. If I'm speaking too fast, I hope not. Another scene of the creation, not really, we see from Italy, also in the 13th century, the days of creation, but not in the direct order. And on the sixth day, we see Magen David, even though it was not Star of David, it was not an actual only Jewish symbol at the time. And afterwards, on the seventh day, there's a floral image. So they tried not to depict it as an actual scene. But in Ashkenaz, everything is changed in Ashkenaz. The beginning of Hebrew illuminated manuscripts with human beings, with figurative figures, starts at Ashkenaz with these manuscripts. These are about the first ones in the 30s, in the 1330s. And we see only images of Adam and Eve. We don't see the creation, not even the creation of Adam and Eve. They're already shown as born. And here they are in this one, and I hope you can see them here. Someone, a much later patron, erased their faces. We're not sure why all the faces are erased. It doesn't have to be because of the second commandment. We're not sure. So, that's how it is. Another image shows the beginning of Bereshit, of Genesis, and we see the scenes from almost all of Genesis and until Bil'am even. But again, it starts only with Adam and Eve. We don't see the first days of creation. And another example, also from the 14th century in Ashkenaz. Okay, so what do we see in Ashkenaz? Instead of the actual creation, they're pushing toward a more inter-Jewish exegetical portrayal of creation by putting an emphasis on the notion of Maaseh Bereshit, account of creation, and Maaseh HaMishkan, the account of the tabernacle. And here I'll put some more texts to explain this idea. Now, the notion of the close relationship between the account of creation and the account of the tabernacle has its roots in late antiquity writing based on Exodus 25:9, in which we read that Moses was instructed to build the desert tabernacle according to the image shown to him on Mount Sinai. So everything he saw was built afterwards in the tabernacle. And God spoke to Moses throughout the pattern given to him and executed by Bezalel, the chief artisan of the tabernacle, from the empty space between the cherubs and the Kaporet, the mercy seat. And these are the main ideas we should remember here, that there's a close link between creation, the tabernacle, and the mercy seat, the Kaporet. Now, the idea that the tabernacle built by Moses symbolizes the divine creation appears already as the first century of the Common Era in the writings of Philo of Alexandria, who declares that the entire universe is a temple. And I'll just read a few phrases. We ought not to look upon the universal wall as the highest and truest temple of God, having for its most holy place that most sacred part of the essence of all existing things, namely the heaven. But the other temple is made with hands. He moreover foresaw that there could not be any great number of temples built either in many different places or in the same place, thinking it fitting that as God is one, his temple also should be one. So he already links the idea of the creation with one temple in Jerusalem. And according to rabbinic literature in Tosefta Yoma, already from the 2nd century, the world was created from the same rock on which the Ark of Covenant rested. So the idea of the creation comes back to the place where the temple was built. And this idea, we can see it not only in early centuries, but also in the 13th century, which will be our main focus here, especially in the writings of the Hasidei Ashkenaz, the German pietists, a group of rabbis living in the 13th and 14th century, especially from the Kalonymus family, Rabbi Judah the Pious, his student Rabbi Elazar Vos, and Rabbi Judah's grandson, Rabbi Elazar ben Moshe the preacher. And on your right, you can see one manuscript of Rabbi Elazar's, the preacher's writing, his commentary on Exodus, where we find the idea that the temple was created prior to the world, and that the earthly temple or tabernacle resembles the heavenly one. So let's see some art. Now, the concept of the relationship between Maaseh Mishkan and Maaseh Bereshit has been portrayed in Jewish art since antiquity, at least from the Bar Kokhba coins, where we see the image of the ark inside the temple, even though the actual Ark of Covenant, as we saw in Indiana Jones, was missing since the destruction of the first temple. But the idea was that when the third temple will be rebuilt, then the ark will come back and be seated inside the actual temple. So that's why it's portrayed here as more of a Greek temple, but this construction. Now, what we see here, we see that resemblance of the cherubs with their wings shielding the kaporet, the round part, and two dots that resembles the poles attached to the side of the ark, which are the badim. Now, the same imagery was also found in the Dura Europa synagogue from the 3rd century near Damascus. We see here above the Torah niche the same idea of the round part inside the temple and the two dots. Now, in Dura Europus, we can see a difference between the earthly temple and tabernacle. It is actually the desert tabernacle, which also is supposed to be shown as the Jerusalem temple, here on your left, with the resemblance here of the Ark of Covenant inside it. And on the other part, we see the heavenly temple, the one that rests in heaven and should come back to earth only as the third temple, which will be rebuilt someday. And you can see also that in the earthly temple, there are 7 gates, 7 walls actually, to portray the idea of 7 palaces that surrounds the temple. And all of this is just on 2 sides of the Torah niche. Now, we saw that the idea of the way the universe is supposed to look like, just like the temple and the tabernacle, in Jewish art from the 2nd century, from the 3rd century, but this idea comes into the Christian world in the 6th century, in the Christian topography. And here we have only images from the 9th century that survived, but they are based on 6th century manuscripts. And we see again the idea that the entire world was created in this shape. It doesn't mean that they didn't know that the world was round. It is more of a conceptual idea of the way the world looked like. Now, the ideas that were presented in Christian art transferred later on into Jewish art, back into Jewish art. And here we see it again. In the Sarajevo Haggadah, the one that we saw at the beginning, the only one that portrays the entire creation. And we see that from the moment the world was created, from the first day, not only from the void afterwards, we see this image of the round topic of the round top of the world. And you can see it here. Now, when it comes to Ashkenazi manuscripts depicting the heavenly Jerusalem and the way they imagined the temple would look like, they showed it as the most beautiful building they are familiar with, and it is more like a cathedral, less of a something specifically Jewish building. And we see it here in the Bird's Head Haggadah from about 1300. Now it's in the Israeli Museum, originally from Germany. And we see here the souls of the righteous who are raising up their hands to heavenly Jerusalem, and the temple, which resembles a medieval 13th, 14th century building. I would like us to remember that because of the next slides. I would like here to focus on a Pentateuch from the early 14th century, also produced in Germany, where the entire program relates to the concept of Maaseh HaMishkan and Maaseh Bereshit. And here in this manuscript, it features on full page the initial word of each of the books of the Pentateuch. And each page opens with a rubric of the book with illuminations. We look at them, but not in a chronological order. In the book of Numbers, we actually see the desert tabernacle. We see the tribes dressed as knights, the 4 tribes who are protecting the tabernacle. And it is based on Numbers 2. Well, the children of Israel are surrounding the ark and the tabernacle from 4 corners of the world, actually. The next image, on the opening page of the book of Leviticus, we see the lions and eagles, which, according to Mark Epstein, they're an image that is based on sources that describe the veil as having been woven with images of lions and eagles. That's why they're portrayed here. It is supposed to be the parochet in the desert tabernacle and in the temple. So once again, we see the idea of the temple and the tabernacle were altered in this manuscript. Oops. Originally, it was supposed to appear afterwards, but I changed my computer at the last moment, so bear with me. On the left, we see Exodus. Now, this image, when I first saw it, I thought, well, it looks like a tower clock, like the one in Prague and other places. But then I thought, no, it's too early. And then I started looking at other images. And then I saw the one you see on your right, which is a tower clock, one of the earliest. This is the house of the clock, made by a Christian artist in the 13th century. And as I started to learn more and more about medieval clocks, I realized that some of them were already running in the 13th century, and most of them as a tower, so that the entire community could hear and see the hours, especially the hours of prayer. And the idea was not only water clocks, but also mechanical ones. Now, the reference to a clock would appear to be an insufficient attribution, as there are 16 medallions instead of 12 here. But early clocks were also related to compass, and some of them were 16-point star roses. So it is quite likely that the image here in this Pentateuch represents the notion of both time and earthly place, not only the idea of the time, but also the entire movement of the world. Here we see an elephant inside Star of David, and it is supposed to represent the law given to the people of Israel, and the elephant who is bearing it as a crown. And the entire building here is supposed to resemble the heavenly temple. Returning to Genesis, we see a Gothic building, just as we saw before, with 7 towers, a typological number often related to the 7 palaces of heaven, just as we saw in the synagogue of Dura Europos. And in view of the above, the entire scene may well represent the notion of Maaseh HaMishkan and Maaseh Bereshit, not only the heaven, but also because it is Genesis, also the entire creation. Yeah.
There was a question just on the prior slide about why the choice of an elephant.
This is something that is still puzzling. I'm working on war elephants now, but it is a symbol of something that it doesn't look much like an elephant, but it is. It's a symbol of something that bears something on its back. So it is just like the mitzvot that the people of Israel are willing to take upon themselves, the mitzvot, the commandments of the law. So this is what most scholars think now, but it is still quite puzzling. Okay. So the entire plan of this manuscript is supposed to portray this idea of both the creation and the tabernacle. Now here we see something quite different. It is from the Norse family collection. It's Maimonides, Guide of the Perplex, quite late copy of it from Ashkenazi from the 14th century. And as my friends who are studying Maimonides, they're always saying if he only knew what they are doing with his manuscripts, they don't think he would approve, but that's the way it is. And here we see the idea of the account of creation, Maaseh Bereshit. It is written high above, and we see the entire universe created, the stars, the sun, moon, and so forth, the days of creation, Adam and Eve, the animals. And here, instead of the tabernacle, the account of the tabernacle, we see the account of the chariot, Maaseh Merkava. And here I would like to explain more about the idea of Maaseh Merkava and Maaseh Bereshit, the idea of the tabernacle, also the tabernacle, the creation, and the chariot. Just go around here. So before I go into that, I'll introduce you to a manuscript, one of my favorites. It was produced in France in the 13th century, late 13th century, from about 1277 to about 1290, but most of the images and text were written in 1280. It is called the London Miscellany because it's in the British Museum, British Library, sorry. But it is also referred to as the North French Hebrew illuminated manuscript, Miscellany. It's a small book, but it contains over 80 different texts. And I'll relate here to what we see in the middle of this manuscript, full page illuminations, not in a chronological order. And first we'll see them and then I'll explain what is their meaning. So at first we see the Wheel of Fortune, along with the zodiac. So it is the entire universe created. Afterwards, we see the 4th day of creation. We see the sun and the moon and the stars, with round pink circle around them. Then we see the eschatological beasts. We see Bar Yochani, Ziz, which is, how can I say it? It looks here like an ostrich. Sort of a chicken that the righteous will eat at the end of time, as well as the Leviathan and the wild ox. And we see the judgment of Solomon. So you can see it's not really related at first glance. Afterwards, Aaron's rod that gave fruit, Samson and the lion, Adam and Eve, and Noah's Ark. And this series ends with the binding of Isaac. Afterwards, a scene that will relate to, which are the tabernacle implements. Then we see Aaron lighting the menorah, or the high priest lighting the menorah. Once again, the high priest, and David and Goliath. Now, at the beginning, scholars had no idea why these images were portrayed as such, one next to the other. And then I started reading the manuscript, and I found that it is related to the piyut read on Yom Kippurim of Seder Avodah, the order of creation of work, which is called "You Established a World with Most Grace" by Yosei ben Yosei, written approximately at the 6th century, but it is not true. Now, the text here read on every Yom Kippur, as some of you know, it depicts the idea of the entire creation. Afterwards, it talks about Adam and Eve, and Noah, the binding of Isaac, the eschatological beasts, and then the most part of the piyut relates to the work of the high priest in the temple, in the tabernacle, and then in the temple during Yom Kippurim. So that's the main idea here. And we see that the images just follow the text. Now, it is not only the text of the piyut, but also in this manuscript, we have a commentary, a long commentary on this piyut, which explains every little detail. And we can see in the images that, for example, I haven't brought it here, but for example, the high priest, instead of a mitre, it is said that he is like a king wearing a crown. So here we see him as a king with a crown. So the text and the illumination go hand in hand in this manuscript. And it is based on, most of the texts here are based on the ideas of Hasidei Ashkenazi, of the German pietists who were working at that time and place in Germany at the time this manuscript was produced. Now I'd like us to look at this image of the temple implements. And we see an image of two angels, which are actually seraphim, not cherubs. They have 6 wings. And we see the mercy seat, the jar of manna, and the table of the bread. Now, as opposed to the recurring conventional imagery in late antiquity, the half circle here, it's in the middle. The half circle here is not intended to represent the cherubim, as they are already appear in the scene. And they are not only cherubs, they are actually seraphim. Rather, it seems to be a rainbow. The half circle above the golden ark may be related to the one mentioned in Ezekiel 1:28. Like the appearance of the bow which shines in the clouds on a day of rain. Such was the appearance of the surrounding radiance, that was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Lord. This is part of the vision of Ezekiel. Now, in this image, the Ark of Covenant and the portrayal of the throne of God are associated with the vision of the Merkabah based on Ezekiel 1. The book of Ezekiel provides the foundation for the Chalot literature, which deals primarily with the heavenly temple. Hence its name, Chalot, meaning temples or palaces. And the Chalot literature, probably from the 3rd to the 6th century, was also known to Hasidei Ashkenaz, which from their writings we know most of the texts of the Chalot. And in a later Midrash from the late medieval period, we read in Numbers Rabbah and about relates to Ezekiel, and it explains that it is to teach you that the ark resembles the throne of God. So they are taking the idea of both the throne of God and the ark and the creation, who are all having the same image, the one with the bow above and the rectangular dance at the end. Here it was supposed to do some cool graphic stuff, but it won't work here because it's a PDF. So I'm sorry, it is supposed to go downwards. In Rabbi Elazar of Worms, one of Rabbi Judah the Pious' most prominent student, in his commentary on the Merkabah, we read that the throne of God, is round like the top of the letter Kaf, but it is upwards instead of the back, and rectangular on the bottom. So the idea of the ark and the rectangular, we see it here. Now, the shape described has been familiar in Jewish art, as you saw, since antiquity, and was used to portray the account of creation, Maaseh Bereshit, and the account of the tabernacle, Maaseh HaMishkan. Thus, here we find another link between Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh HaMishkan, and the account of the chariot, Maaseh Merkabah. So we see all of them together portrayed in this specific image, which here the context of the image is Seder Avodah, the order of work, which the high priest was supposed to do on Yom Kippurim, the most holiest day of the year. When he entered the holiest of holiest, he saw the Ark of Covenant, which stands up above the rock from which the entire world was created. So everything goes into the spot of this part of the creation. Now, going back to this manuscript, we see here again the idea of Maaseh Merkabah and Maaseh Bereshit, and the account of creation and the account of the chariot. But here, when they want to portray the account of the chariot, it is not written in a rectangular as the account of Genesis, of the creation, but it is in a half circle. We see again how the idea of the circle and the rectangular come together. So for them, the ideas that started in the first centuries were understood also artistically at the end of the 13th and 14th century. Just to wrap things up, because it is Tu B'Shvat, I read in Midrash Tadsheh, the one that I started with, the idea of the entire concept of the third day of creation, where it is written also about the water and the vegetation. Now, the water, according to the Midrash Tadsheh, relates to the Kohanim, because they are always washing their hands and their body. For example, the high priest on Yom Kippur, he changes his clothes 8 times a day and he washes again and again. So it is related also to the temple. But the vegetation, they are related to the people of Israel and to the land of Israel, because the entire thing that Israel is supposed to do is to work the land and grow their fruits. So happy to Bishvat. I hope it was clear enough. If you have any questions, I'll stop the share so I can see everybody.
Oh, thank you so much. I see already, Benjamin. I'll just kind of call on people so we're not talking over each other. Go ahead, Benjamin.
So first of all, fabulous. I can't, I'm just, my head is exploding. I guess, besides just sort of asking, how you learned all of this, which of course is not for us to learn right now. But I guess I wonder, first of all, are most of the things the images that you own facsimiles that are published, or so that if you assembled it brilliantly, but that's stuff that's out there in it. So because there are copies, I know that some of the sources are familiar to me, but some of them are completely new, and I just sort of wondered whether those are published books that are about these manuscripts, and I'm glad to know that. But well, I guess that's it. I go on to someone else because I'm just blown away. It's a really a fascinating subject to me, and I'm just blown away. So thank you. Go on to someone else.
I'll just say most of them are in facsimiles, but also most of them are already online. When I worked on the London Miscellany, it wasn't online yet, so I worked with the facsimile and the actual manuscript. But now it is all available free in the libraries.
But you knew where to go and what to look for, which of course, I can't get inside your head, but I would love to. Thank you. It was really brilliant, really fabulous.
And I'm sure there's nothing like holding the actual physical facsimile, no matter what we can get online, just to,
Yeah, and the actual manuscript. It's just, you can't imagine that. Yeah. Especially as it's one of a kind, unlike the print.
Amazing. Maybe can I jump in with a question? I also, first of all, thank you so much. And it was just, so many amazing different themes and angles about all this. And yet I sort of just had this question from the very beginning, which is sort of the basic question of what you started with, which is, why, at least in terms of, how you presented it, is there sort of a reluctance or a steering away from, in these medieval Jewish manuscripts, staying away from depicting the days of creation before Adam Harishon?
Good question.
Was that simply a reaction to a desire to distinguish ourselves from the Christians, which is not, I don't think, is a bad answer. But I guess like the theological part of me is it, was it out of Yira, was it, or was it just out of sort of the human nature to depict that which we understand better? And so therefore, I mean, that's a very Tu B'Shvat theme, right? That at the end of the day, I can't understand a tree, or like I'm looking over here, these beautiful flowers that someone got me that, these ones didn't sort of wilt and droop, they dried, right? So I would love if you could address that a little bit.
It's basically because the polemical idea behind the Christian manuscripts, and also not only manuscripts, but also sculptures outside the cathedrals, which portray a message not only for the Christians, but also for the Jews to convert. So for the Jews to copy the images of the creation, it is like saying, well, the Christians have a point, and let's portray God how he creates. but we can't depict it actually, so let's avoid it and let's put the emphasis on the actual Jewish part of the creation. That the creation was created for the Jews, for the temple. So it is more of a inside Jewish, Jews trying to convince themselves not to convert, because they are under so much pressure to convert at the time. That is, it is basic for them, especially in Spain, where the Dominican friars entered their synagogues on Saturdays, and they were forced to listen to their preaching and their attempts to convert the Jews using Jewish Midrashim. So that's the most difficult part, listening to Midrashim, Jewish Midrashim actually, and said by Christian friars trying to convince Jews, well, you see, even your rabbis understood that Jesus is the Lord, so convert. So for them, it was a way of standing aside. But I must say that in other manuscripts, mostly in Machzorim from Ashkenaz, there's a direct polemic with the images of Christian images. So they're taking the Christian images and putting back Jewish ideas into them. So this is true only to the creation.
Can I ask another question?
Can I give Phyllis a chance?
Of course.
And I'll come back to you. Go for it, Phyllis.
I can't get over the colors. Even if I didn't understand the thing you said, which was brilliant, I agree with Benjamin. The colors were so magnificent, and so many of them remain. I guess the gold is real gold, but could you talk to us a little bit about the colors? I'm back to being 6 years old and being amazed at the colors. I just love the colors.
Yeah, every time I see an actual manuscript, I'm surprised once and once again how brilliant the colors is. It's something that I can't realize in the pictures because they are not as shiny as they are in real life. And they are gouache. I'm not sure if it is the same in English. Gouache paint. And since the books were closed, they stood quite well. Some of them, as you saw, one of the first images. And yes, it is real gold. First, they glued the gold, and only afterwards they painted but not all of the images were done by Jews. I must stress this, that sometimes the patrons used Christian workshops, but they instructed the painters what to paint. So it is always what the patron wanted them to paint.
Thank you. We have something wonderful in New York City. We have the cloisters, and they just had some of the manuscripts. We were very lucky. It was a very small amount because it was mainly Christian, but it is just so amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I was supposed to be there and see the Shoken Pentateuch, but I couldn't go.
Yeah. I'm finished because otherwise I could spend the whole time, and let's give other people a chance.
I'm happy to call on Benjamin again.
So you said that just to relate to what Phyllis just asked, but I've done a little bit of research, and I tried to do to illuminate a manuscript on cloth, and I learned that they were using egg tempera. Is that not the more dominant material?
Only afterwards.
Only after when?
In the 14th century,
Oh,
late
so,
14th.
okay. But the question I was going to ask earlier was, why do we not see images, of the actual temple? Is it because they didn't know what it looked like, because they didn't actually have the knowledge of it?
The actual image is what you saw on the Bird's Head Haggadah. So sometimes we do have them, but not always. And it is resembling a cathedral. That's the way it is portrayed.
And the image that you showed of the two poles being represented as dots, that's seeing them in plan view, or it's seeing them at the end of the pole. So the poles that would be like, yeah. So they really mix together abstractions and diagrammatic views of things with representational views, all in one tiny image. And can you show with your hands the size of that painting? I mean, it was really tiny. So it's like almost miniaturized work that they're doing.
One of them, it's coins, the Bar-Kokhba coins, and they're coins just like today.
Oh yes, that's right. They were coins. Right. But that was also represented in a painted image.
Like a book.
Okay. Oh, just so great. So did you write a book about this? On this? Is this all?
All of this is part of an article I wrote, but I wrote a book on the London Miscellanean, the ideas of Hasidah.
So we got to find your book. You got to plug your book. Fabulous. Thank you so much for coming.
Amazing.
I'm just really
amazing.
Really
Thank you all for getting up so early in the morning for me.
What do you mean?
Now, this is already late for some people. If I may, first of all, really a toda rabba from all of us. I mean, all of the themes, just the, creation and the Mishkan and the Merkava and Jewish Christian, relations and dialogue, you fit so much in. And I want to, if I may, sort of bring us full circle from what I said at the beginning regarding the appropriateness of this today, with the confluence of Tu B'Shvat, MLK Day, and on the heels of the horrific experience in Colleyville, Texas, that your answer to my question actually really just made me think of this in a different way. You said, you talked about how in these manuscripts, we as Jews depicted, in essence, that part of creation that was particularistic, not universal. And so I think it's a really important lesson for us that as we think about Maseh Bereshit, right, as we think of creation and as we think of Tu B'Shvat, and in these days we think of climate change, as I'm looking out my window and it was pouring rain last night in the middle of January, there is that universal element which we can't lose sight of, and that broadening, if you will, of the circle, right? That interfaith piece that's important, that's part of the strength of that community in Colleyville. That was the bedrock of the Reverend Dr. King's message. And though we can only approach that with any depth if we have a real sense of who we are particularly. And that I think it's so important, especially today, and especially in the climate in New York City and in the United States, that we wear that particularism and that we're proud of it, and that we channel it in a way to be in dialogue in a positive way, and to really show the world, like, here we are, and here's what we have to offer, and here's what we can add to the dialogue, right? It reminds me of one of Rabbi Gordis's, Danny Gordis's older books, does the world need the Jews? And I hope that answer is always yes. So really, toda rabba to Dr. Offenberg for just inspiring us and illuminating us on this Yom Sheni, Yom Shel Tu B'Shvat, and Yom Shel MLK Day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Stay safe.